The gunshot echoed across the beach. Lieutenant Edward Hartley fell forward into the sand. Blood spread from the wound in his back. 89 Marines turned to see Private Jack Morrison standing behind the fallen officer, rifle still raised, smoke drifting from the barrel. For 3 seconds, nobody moved, nobody breathed. A Marine had just shot his own commanding officer in the back. That was murder. That was mutiny. That was a firing squad offense. Then Lieutenant Hartley's body twitched. His hand moved toward the grenade he had been holding. The pin was already pulled. He had been about to throw it into the machine gun nest where 30 Marines were sheltering. He had been about to kill his own men. Morrison lowered his rifle. "He was going to kill you all," he said quietly. "He's been losing it for 3 days." The grenade rolled from Hartley's dead hand. It detonated in the sand, 5 meters from the nearest Marine. If Morrison had been 2 seconds slower, that grenade would have detonated inside the shelter. 30 men would have died. This is not a simple story about heroism. This is a story about the breaking point, about what happens when a good officer cracks under pressure and becomes more dangerous than the enemy, about the impossible decision one private made in a split second, about whether killing your commander can ever be the right thing to do, and about why Jack Morrison received the Silver Star for shooting Lieutenant Hartley in the back. But first, you need to understand who Edward Hartley was before Peleliu destroyed him. Lieutenant Edward Hartley graduated from the Naval Academy in 1941, top 10% of his class. His instructors described him as intelligent, disciplined, and natural leader. He was exactly the kind of officer the Marine Corps needed for the war everyone knew was coming. He received his commission, completed officer training, was assigned to 1st Marine Division. By the time Pearl Harbor happened, Hartley was a platoon leader with a reputation for competence and calm under pressure. His men respected him. His superiors valued him. He was on track for command of his own company within a year. He saw his first combat at Guadalcanal in August 1942. The landing went smoothly initially. His platoon secured their section of beach without casualties. Then the Japanese counterattacked. For the next 6 months, Hartley led his Marines through some of the most brutal fighting of the Pacific War. He performed well, made sound tactical decisions, kept his men alive better than most officers. He was wounded twice, minor injuries both times, and refused evacuation. His fitness reports praised his leadership and courage under fire. He was promoted to first lieutenant in early 1943. But something had changed. Men in his platoon noticed it. He was quieter, more withdrawn. He stared into space sometimes, had trouble sleeping, would snap at minor infractions he used to ignore. These were not unusual symptoms. Many combat veterans showed similar signs. It was called combat fatigue or shell shock. Today we call it PTSD. In 1943, there was no treatment, no counseling, no medical discharge for psychological trauma. You either held it together or you did not. Hartley held it together. Mostly. After Guadalcanal, his unit rotated back for rest and training. Hartley seemed to recover some. The withdrawal lessened. He seemed more like his old self. When 1st Marine Division prepared for the invasion of Cape Gloucester. In late 1943, Hartley's superiors had no concerns about his fitness for duty. Cape Gloucester was different from Guadalcanal. Dense jungle, constant rain, mud that swallowed equipment. Disease was as dangerous as the enemy. Hartley led his platoon through a month of miserable combat. His performance was solid, if not outstanding. Some of his decisions seemed overly cautious, but caution kept men alive, so nobody complained. By mid-1944, Hartley had been in combat for nearly 2 years. He had seen hundreds of men die, had killed dozens of enemy soldiers himself, had been wounded, sick, exhausted, terrified. He'd been functioning on adrenaline and discipline for so long that normal human emotions had been suppressed into a tight ball of controlled tension. He never talked about what he was feeling. Officers did not do that. You led from the front, you showed confidence, you did not burden your men with your fears or doubts. So Hartley kept everything inside and continued doing his job. Then came Peleliu. The invasion of Peleliu was supposed to take 4 days. It took 73. The intelligence was catastrophically wrong. The Japanese defenses were far stronger than expected. The terrain was nightmarish. Coral ridges riddled with caves and tunnels. Every position had interlocking fields of fire. Every advance was paid for in blood. Hartley's platoon landed on September 15, 1944. They made it off the beach but took heavy casualties immediately. By the end of the first day, the platoon had lost 20% of its strength. By the end of the first week, they had lost over 50%. Hartley was still functioning, making decisions, directing his men, but people who knew him noticed the deterioration. He was not sleeping at all. When he spoke, his voice was flat. His eyes had a distant quality. He made decisions that seemed disconnected from tactical reality. On September 22nd, the 7th day of the battle, Hartley's platoon was ordered to take a ridge position. The approach was completely exposed. Enemy machine guns had clear fields of fire. Any assault would take massive casualties. Hartley ordered the assault anyway. His men tried to comply. 12 Marines died in the first 30 seconds. The survivors pulled back. Hartley ordered another assault. His sergeants tried to suggest alternative approaches. Hartley insisted on frontal assault. More men died. After the third failed assault, his company commander pulled the platoon back and assigned the mission to another unit. Hartley was furious. He believed his men had failed him, had not tried hard enough, were cowards. This was not rational assessment. This was a man whose grip on reality was slipping. Private Jack Morrison had been with Hartley's platoon since Guadalcanal. He had enormous respect for the lieutenant, had seen him make brilliant tactical decisions under fire, had watched him risk his own life to save wounded Marines. Morrison knew Hartley was a good officer, but Morrison also knew something was very wrong. The lieutenant he had served under for 2 years was gone. This person who looked like Hartley and wore his rank was someone different, someone dangerous. Other Marines in the platoon felt the same way. They talked quietly among themselves, wondered if the lieutenant should be relieved, but questioning an officer's fitness was serious, could be seen as insubordination. And what if they were wrong? What if Hartley was fine and they were just scared? So they said nothing. And Hartley continued to deteriorate. On September 24th, Hartley's platoon was in defensive positions on a contested ridge. They had beaten back 2 Japanese attacks during the night. Dawn brought temporary quiet. The Marines were exhausted. Many had not slept in days. They took advantage of the lull to rest, clean weapons, and redistribute ammunition. Hartley was pacing, back and forth along the defensive line, talking to himself. His words were incoherent, something about holding the line and can't let them through and not again. Marines watched him nervously but did not know what to do. Around 800 hours, a Marine spotted Japanese soldiers maneuvering toward their position. He reported to Hartley. The lieutenant's response was to order immediate evacuation of the position. No fighting withdrawal, no covering fire, just abandon the position and run. His sergeants objected. This position was critical. Abandoning it would expose adjacent units. They had orders to hold. Hartley became agitated, started shouting, said they were all going to die if they stayed, that they had to run now. One sergeant, Staff Sergeant Miller, tried to calm him down, suggested they radio company command for instructions. Hartley pulled his sidearm and pointed it at Miller, told him to shut up, told everyone to prepare to evacuate immediately. The Marines did not know what to do. Disobeying orders was serious, but following orders to abandon a critical position was also serious. And their lieutenant was pointing a gun at their sergeant. Nothing in training had prepared them for this situation. Before anyone could act, the Japanese attack hit. Mortars started falling. Machine gun fire raked the position. The moment for decisions had passed. Now there was only survival. Hartley seemed to come out of his fugue state. He stopped waving the gun around, started directing defensive fire. For a few minutes, he was the competent officer they remembered. He positioned Marines effectively, called in mortar support, made sound tactical decisions. The Japanese assault was repulsed. The Marines held the position. Casualties were light. Hartley had led the defense effectively. Maybe everyone had been wrong. Maybe the stress had just gotten to him temporarily. Maybe he was fine now. Then, as the firing died down, Hartley walked over to where 30 Marines were sheltering in a machine gun position. They were reloading weapons, checking ammunition, standard post-engagement routine. Hartley stood looking down at them. His expression was blank. Private Morrison was 50 meters away. He saw Hartley pull a grenade from his belt, saw him pull the pin. And in that moment, Morrison understood what was about to happen. Hartley was going to throw the grenade into the machine gun nest. He was going to kill 30 Marines. Whether he thought they were Japanese, whether he had completely lost touch with reality, whether he was intentionally committing murder, Morrison did not know and did not care. What Morrison knew was that in approximately 2 seconds, Lieutenant Hartley was going to kill 30 men, and Morrison was the only person in position to stop it. He raised his rifle, aimed at the lieutenant's back, and fired. The bullet hit Hartley between the shoulder blades. He fell forward. The grenade rolled from his hand. Morrison screamed, "Grenade!" and 30 Marines scrambled out of the pit. The grenade detonated in the empty position. If they had still been there, most would have died. Staff Sergeant Miller ran over to Hartley's body, confirmed he was dead, looked at Morrison. Morrison was standing frozen, rifle still raised, staring at what he had done. He had just killed his commanding officer. In front of 89 witnesses, his life was over. He would be court-martialed, executed for murder. Miller made a decision. He turned to the assembled Marines. Lieutenant Hartley was killed by enemy sniper fire. Everyone understand? Silence. Then, slowly, heads nodded. Yes, sniper fire. That was the story. Nobody had seen Morrison shoot the lieutenant. There had been shooting, confusion. In the chaos, Hartley was hit by a sniper. Tragic, but these things happen. Morrison tried to object. He was not going to let other people lie for him. Miller cut him off. "Shut up, Private. The lieutenant died in combat. That is what happened. We all saw it. Discussion over." The other Marines agreed, quietly but firmly. The official story was sniper fire. Anyone who said otherwise would have to explain why they let one of their own be executed for saving their lives. The body was evacuated. The report was filed. Lieutenant Edward Hartley, killed in action by enemy sniper fire while leading his platoon in defense of critical ridge position. Posthumous Bronze Star recommended for leadership under fire. The platoon expected that would be the end of it. Morrison had gotten away with it. He would have to live with having killed his officer. But he would not be executed. It was the best outcome possible from an impossible situation. Except it was not the end, because someone talked. A Marine from another platoon had been nearby, had seen the shooting, had seen Morrison fire at Hartley. And this Marine, who had not witnessed the preceding events and did not understand the context, reported what he saw to his platoon leader, who reported it to the company commander, who launched an investigation. Morrison was arrested. Staff Sergeant Miller and the rest of the platoon were questioned. The truth came out. Morrison had shot Lieutenant Hartley, deliberately, in the back, in front of witnesses. This was murder. The court-martial was convened within a week. The charge was murder of a superior officer in combat. The maximum penalty was death. Morrison's defense was that he was preventing Hartley from killing 30 Marines. The prosecution's position was that this was not Morrison's decision to make if Hartley was unfit proper. Channels existed to report this. Summary execution was not authorized. The trial should have been straightforward. Morrison admitted to the shooting. The evidence was clear. The law was unambiguous. Guilty verdict, death penalty, done. But the witnesses complicated things. Every Marine from Hartley's platoon testified for the defense. They described Hartley's deteriorating mental state, the erratic orders, the gun pointed at Staff Sergeant Miller, the grenade. They testified that Morrison had saved 30 lives, that Hartley would have killed them all if Morrison had not acted. The prosecution argued that the Marines had time to disarm Hartley non-lethally, that Morrison could have tackled him or shot to wound. That killing was not the only option. Morrison's defense attorney asked the witnesses, from 50 meters away, with maybe 2 seconds before the grenade was thrown, what else could Morrison have done? Tried to tackle Hartley from 50 meters, not physically possible. Shot to wound. Hartley was wearing gear that would stop anything but a center mass shot. Yelled a warning. Not enough time for anyone to react. The prosecution had no good answers to these questions, but they maintained that regardless of circumstances, a private shooting an officer was intolerable. If this was excused, it would undermine military discipline. Every soldier could claim their officer was unfit and needed to be killed for the safety of the unit. The court-martial board deliberated for 3 days. The verdict came back: guilty of manslaughter, not guilty of murder. Sentence: reduction in rank, forfeiture of pay, dishonorable discharge, no execution. Morrison accepted the sentence. He was alive. That was more than he had expected. A dishonorable discharge would ruin his civilian life. But he was alive to have a civilian life. Then something unusual happened. Multiple officers, including the company commander and battalion commander, filed objections to the sentence. They argued that Morrison's actions, while technically violations of regulations, were justified under the circumstances, that he had saved lives, that punishing him sent the wrong message. The division commander reviewed the case personally, read all the testimony, interviewed witnesses, and made a decision that was almost unprecedented. The conviction was overturned. Morrison was restored to rank, and he was recommended for the Silver Star for extraordinary heroism and presence of mind in preventing loss of friendly lives under extreme combat conditions. The citation did not mention that he shot his own officer. It stated that Morrison recognized an immediate threat to friendly forces and took decisive action to eliminate that threat at great personal risk and without regard for consequences to himself. Technically accurate, carefully worded to avoid specifics, but everyone who knew the story understood what it meant. Morrison received the Silver Star in a ceremony 6 weeks later. He stood at attention while the medal was pinned to his uniform. He did not feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had killed someone he respected and admired. The fact that it was necessary did not make it less painful. Lieutenant Hartley's family was told he died heroically in combat. They were not told about his mental breakdown. They were not told that one of his own men had killed him. They received his Bronze Star and the gratitude of the nation for his service and sacrifice. This created an ethical problem. The official records and family notification contained lies. But the alternative was telling the family that their son and brother had suffered a psychological break and nearly committed mass murder before being shot by his own man. That truth would destroy them. So the lie was maintained. Morrison struggled with this. He wanted to tell the truth, felt like lying to the family was dishonoring Hartley's memory. But his superiors and fellow Marines convinced him that some truths cause more harm than good. Hartley had been a good officer for years. His final actions, while mentally broken, did not define his entire service. After the war, Morrison tried to move on. He used his GI Bill benefits to attend college, got a degree, started a career, married, had children, lived a normal life. But he never forgot September 24, 1944. He never spoke publicly about what happened. When people asked about his Silver Star, he said it was for actions on Peleliu and changed the subject. He attended veteran reunions and connected with other survivors from his unit. They all knew the real story. They never talked about it with outsiders. In 1982, 38 years after the incident, a military historian researching the Battle of Peleliu discovered discrepancies in the records. Lieutenant Hartley's death was listed as sniper fire, but the Silver Star citation for Morrison suggested something else happened. The historian contacted Morrison and asked for clarification. Morrison refused to comment, said that what happened on Peleliu stayed on Peleliu. The historian persisted, contacted other veterans from the unit, eventually pieced together the real story. The historian wanted to publish. Morrison begged him not to. Hartley's family still believed the official story. Publishing the truth would hurt them decades after the fact for no good reason. The historian agreed to withhold names and specific details, but published an account of the incident in a book about battlefield ethics. The book came out in 1985. Morrison's name was not used, but people who knew the story recognized it. Some veterans groups criticized Morrison, said he had committed murder regardless of circumstances, said he should have been executed. Others defended him, said he had made an impossible choice and saved lives. Morrison himself never claimed to be a hero. In a rare interview in 1990, he said, "I killed a man I respected. I did it to save others. That was the calculus. 30 lives versus 1. But I've thought about it every day for 46 years. I don't know if I made the right choice. I just know I made the only choice I could live with." Lieutenant Hartley's family learned the truth in 1995 when the military declassified certain combat records. They were devastated. Their brother's memory had been tainted. They felt betrayed by the lies. But after the initial shock, they began to understand the context. Hartley had been a good man. He had served honorably for years. His breakdown was not his fault. It was the result of sustained trauma that the military of that era had no way to treat. What happened was tragedy, not villainy. And Morrison had done what he had to do. In 1998, Hartley's sister reached out to Morrison. They met. It was difficult for both of them. She thanked him for being honest about what happened, thanked him for saving the Marines her brother would have killed. She said her brother would not have wanted to be responsible for their deaths, that if he had been in his right mind, he would have thanked Morrison for stopping him. Morrison wept. It was the first time he had cried about the incident since 1944. The guilt he had carried for 54 years did not disappear, but it lessened. The family's forgiveness meant more than the Silver Star ever had. Jack Morrison died in 2004 at age 82. His obituary mentioned his service in the Pacific and his Silver Star. It did not mention the specific circumstances. His family knew, the surviving members of his unit knew, but the broader public did not need to know. The lesson of Morrison's story is not simple. It is not about heroism triumphing over evil. It is about impossible choices in combat, about what happens when good officers break under pressure that would break anyone, about soldiers who have to make split-second decisions with incomplete information and live with those decisions forever. Should Morrison have shot Lieutenant Hartley? Legally, no. Ethically, probably yes. 30 lives against 1. But it is easy to say that in retrospect. Morrison had 2 seconds to decide. He chose, and he saved 30 men. Should Hartley have been relieved of duty before it got to that point? Absolutely. His mental state was deteriorating visibly. But in 1944, there was no system for removing officers for psychological reasons. Combat fatigue was not well understood. Soldiers were expected to function until they physically could not. The modern military has better systems, better understanding of PTSD, better procedures for identifying and treating psychological trauma. Officers showing signs of breakdown can be removed from command without stigma. This is progress. But even today, soldiers sometimes face impossible choices. What do you do when your orders are wrong, when your leader is incompetent or incapacitated, when following orders will get people killed? These questions do not have simple answers. Morrison's answer was to shoot his commander. That saved 30 lives. It also cost him decades of guilt and struggle. Both things are true. He was a hero and a man who killed someone he admired. War contains these contradictions. The Silver Star sits in a display case at a military museum. Next to it is a placard with Morrison's name and the citation. Visitors read it and imagine traditional heroism. None of them know the real story. That the heroism involved shooting an American officer in the back, that the medal recognizes an act of mercy, killing, and mutiny. Maybe that is appropriate. Some stories are too complex for simple commemoration. Some acts of heroism are too painful to celebrate openly. Morrison saved lives. He deserves recognition. But he also took a life. That deserves acknowledgement too. He shot his own commander, saved 89 men, got a medal, and lived with the weight of that decision until the day he died. That is the complete story. No heroes without flaws, no victories without costs, just humans making impossible choices and living with consequences. Jack Morrison. Private, murderer, hero, both, neither, all of it. The man who shot his commander and saved them all. The psychological impact of Morrison's decision extended beyond his personal guilt. The other Marines who witnessed the incident carried their own burdens. They had watched a fellow Marine kill their officer. They had lied in official reports. They had testified in a court-martial. And they had all been forced to confront an uncomfortable question. What would they have done in Morrison's position? Most concluded they would not have had the courage to pull the trigger. Not because they disagreed with the decision, but because shooting an officer required overcoming years of training and discipline that emphasized absolute obedience to command. Morrison had broken that conditioning in 2 seconds. That required extraordinary presence of mind or complete disregard for consequences. Probably both. Staff Sergeant Miller, who had tried to protect Morrison by claiming sniper fire, struggled with his own role. He had attempted to cover up a killing. When the truth came out, he faced disciplinary action for filing false reports. He received a letter of reprimand and was passed over for promotion. His career suffered because he had tried to protect a man who saved lives. Miller never expressed regret about his actions. In a letter written years later, he stated, "I would do the same thing again. Morrison saved my life and 29 others. If protecting him meant ending my career, that was a price worth paying. The system was wrong to punish him for doing what was necessary." This raised uncomfortable questions about military justice. Morrison had violated regulations. He had killed a superior officer, but he had done so to prevent mass casualties. The system was designed to punish violations of regulations. It struggled to accommodate violations that were morally justified. The court-martial board members later admitted they had been torn. One board member said in an interview decades later, "We knew Morrison was not a murderer. We knew he had saved lives. But we also knew that if we completely exonerated him, it would set a precedent that soldiers could kill officers they deemed unfit. That precedent would be dangerous. So we tried to find middle ground, guilty of manslaughter, light sentence, preserved military discipline while acknowledging the unusual circumstances." The middle ground satisfied nobody. Those who believed Morrison was a hero thought any guilty verdict was unjust. Those who believed military discipline was paramount thought manslaughter was too lenient. The division commander's decision to overturn the conviction and award the Silver Star was controversial in military legal circles. Some Judge Advocate General officers argued this decision undermined military law. If convictions could be overturned based on commanders' subjective assessment of circumstances, what was the point of courts-martial? Others argued that rigid application of regulations without regard for context would lead to unjust outcomes. The Morrison case became a case study in military law schools. The broader question of how to handle mentally incapacitated officers remained unsolved. Hartley's breakdown was extreme, but lesser versions occurred throughout the war. Officers who became paranoid, who froze under fire, who made increasingly erratic decisions. What were subordinates supposed to do? Official channels existed in theory. Soldiers could report concerns to senior officers. Medical officers could evaluate fitness for duty. Officers could be relieved and reassigned. But these processes were slow. In combat, circumstances evolved quickly. By the time proper channels addressed a problem, people could die. Morrison's case prompted some changes in procedures. Division-level medical officers received better training in recognizing combat fatigue. Company commanders were instructed to monitor their officers' mental states more carefully. Procedures for rapid relief of incapacitated officers were clarified. These changes came too late for Morrison and Hartley, but they may have prevented similar incidents later in the war. The incident also affected how the platoon functioned afterward. Morrison was returned to the unit after his exoneration. Some worried this would create tension. How do you serve alongside someone who killed your previous commander? How do you trust that he won't make another split-second decision to shoot someone? But the platoon accepted Morrison without apparent conflict. They had all seen what happened. They all understood why he did it. If anything, Morrison was treated with more respect than before. He had made an impossible decision under pressure. He had been willing to sacrifice himself to save others. Those are qualities Marines value. Morrison himself was changed. Before the incident, he had been relatively carefree. After, he became more serious, more cautious. He questioned orders more carefully. This was both good and bad. Good because he was thinking critically about what he was being asked to do. Bad because hesitation in combat can be as dangerous as recklessness. Staff Sergeant Miller noticed the change and addressed it directly. Morrison, you did the right thing once. That doesn't mean you need to second-guess every order. Most officers are fine. Hartley was an exception. Don't let one bad situation make you unable to function. This was sound advice, but difficult to follow. Once you have seen how badly things can go wrong, it is hard to trust that they won't go wrong again. Morrison never fully recovered the confidence he had before September 24, 1944. He completed his service competently, but not enthusiastically. He was counting days until he could go home. The war ended less than a year after Peleliu. Morrison was discharged in late 1945. He returned to his hometown in Ohio, used GI, billed to attend Ohio State University, studied engineering, graduated in 1949, got a job with a manufacturing company, built a normal middle-class life. But the war never completely left him. He had nightmares occasionally. Loud noises made him flinch. He avoided crowds. These were common symptoms among veterans. Most learned to manage them. Morrison did too. He was functional, just not entirely whole. He married in 1951. His wife knew he was a veteran, but not the details of his service. Morrison did not talk about it. This created distance in the marriage. She knew something significant had happened but could not help him process it because he would not share it. They stayed married, but it was not a particularly happy marriage. They had 2 children. Morrison was a distant father, not abusive or neglectful, just emotionally unavailable. He provided for his family, attended school events, did the things fathers were supposed to do, but there was always a sense that part of him was somewhere else, somewhere in the Pacific, somewhere on a ridge on Peleliu. His children later said they knew their father had been in the war, but did not understand its impact until they were adults. He never talked about combat, never displayed his medals, never attended veteran events. It was as if those years of his life did not exist. This changed in the 1980s when the historian published the account of the incident. Morrison's name was not used, but enough details were included that people who knew him recognized the story. His children read the book, confronted him, asked if the story was about him. Morrison initially denied it, then admitted it, then broke down and told them everything. It was the first time he had spoken in detail about what happened. The relief was enormous. He had been carrying this secret for nearly 40 years. Finally sharing it with his family lifted a weight he had not realized how heavy it was. His children's reaction surprised him. They were not horrified. They were proud. Their father had saved 30 lives, had made an impossibly hard decision, had been willing to accept punishment to protect others. That was heroism in the truest sense. This perspective helped Morrison reframe his own understanding of the event. For decades, he had focused on the fact that he had killed someone. His children helped him focus on the fact that he had saved 30 people. Both were true, but emphasizing the latter made the former more bearable. He began attending veteran reunions, reconnected with survivors from his unit. Many told him directly that he had saved their lives. Several had been in the machine gun nest that day. They had lived, married, had children and grandchildren, all because Morrison had pulled a trigger in 1944. One veteran, now in his 70s, hugged Morrison at a reunion and said, "I have 5 grandchildren. They exist because you didn't hesitate. Thank you." Morrison wept. It was one of the few times he felt that what he had done was unambiguously right, but other encounters were more complicated. At one reunion, Morrison met a distant relative of Lieutenant Hartley. The relative knew the full story and wanted to confront Morrison. The conversation was tense. The relative believed Morrison should have found another way, should have tackled Hartley or warned the Marines or done something other than killing him. Morrison did not argue, just said, "You're probably right. There might have been a better way. But I had 2 seconds to decide, and I made the choice I thought would save the most lives. I've thought about it every day since. If you have a better answer, I'd like to hear it." The relative had no answer, eventually admitted that from 50 meters with 2 seconds, there might not have been a better option. But they still struggled with the idea that killing was necessary. The conversation ended without resolution. Some wounds do not heal even decades later. The publication of the story also led to criticism from some quarters. Veterans groups argued that publicizing the incident undermined military discipline, that it encouraged insubordination, that it made officers reluctant to give hard orders for fear their men might decide they were unfit and shoot them. Morrison responded to this criticism in one of his rare public statements. "I didn't shoot Lieutenant Hartley because I disagreed with his orders. I shot him because he was about to murder 30 Marines. There's a difference. If officers are afraid their men will shoot them for giving hard but necessary orders, they're not understanding what happened. I followed Hartley through 2 years of combat and never questioned him until the moment he was about to kill us." This distinction was lost on some critics, but military historians generally agreed that Morrison's case was exceptional. It did not create a wave of similar incidents. Soldiers did not start shooting officers they disagreed with. The feared breakdown of discipline did not occur. What did occur was increased awareness of combat psychological trauma. Hartley's breakdown and Morrison's response highlighted gaps in how the military handled mental health. The contemporary military has better systems, though still not perfect. Officers are monitored more carefully. Relief for mental health reasons is possible without career destruction. Treatment is available. These improvements came too late for Hartley and Morrison, but they have helped countless others. That is perhaps the most positive legacy of a tragedy. Lessons were learned, systems were improved, future soldiers benefited from the painful experience of those who came before. Morrison lived to see these improvements. In his final years, he spoke occasionally at military mental health conferences. He told his story not to glorify what he did, but to illustrate why better systems were necessary. If Lieutenant Hartley had been identified and treated earlier, none of this would have happened. He was a good officer who broke under pressure. The system failed him, and it failed us. He died in 2004. His funeral was attended by over 200 people, including dozens of veterans from his unit. Several were men who had been in the machine gun nest that day. They served as pallbearers, carried the man who saved them to his final rest. His silver star was buried with him. He had never displayed it in life, but his family felt it should accompany him. It represented the most significant act of his life, even if that act was painful and complicated and impossible to celebrate simply. The controversy never fully died. Even today, online forums debate whether Morrison was a hero or a murderer. Some argue he should have been executed. Others argue he should have received the Medal of Honor. Most recognize the situation was too complex for simple judgments. The truth, as always, is complicated. Morrison killed a man. That man was his commanding officer. That officer was about to kill 30 Marines. Morrison had seconds to decide. He chose to save the 30. That choice was heroic and terrible and necessary and traumatic. He lived with the consequences of that choice for 60 years, never celebrated it, never fully regretted it, just carried it as part of who he was. A man who made an impossible decision and saved lives at the cost of his own peace of mind. He shot his own commander, saved 89 men, got a medal, and lived with the weight of that moment until the day he died. That is the complete story. War in its rawest form. Impossible choices made in seconds that echo across lifetimes. Heroes who are also victims, victories that feel like defeats, and the men who carry these burdens so the rest of us do not have to. Jack Morrison. Private, hero, haunted, human. The man who shot his commander and never stopped wondering if there had been another way.